What's up, everybody? Jace Andrews here, and man, do we have some absolutely massive breaking news that's going to completely change how you're thinking about the Dallas Cowboys draft strategy this year. Before we dive into this absolutely crazy situation, I want to say a huge thank you to everybody who has subscribed over the past couple of months, because we officially hit 16,000 subscribers this past weekend, and it genuinely means the world to me. Like, I cannot express how much that means. I love getting to do this every single day. This is my passion. This is what I live and breathe, and the fact that I get to do this as a job is something that I never take for granted, and that's 100% because of you guys. So thank you from the absolute bottom of my heart. It really does mean everything to me. And now let's go from 16K to 17K, because we're just getting started with this channel and this community. The energy is incredible. All right, but speaking of some really important numbers, the Dallas Cowboys currently have picks number 12 and picks number 20 in this year's upcoming NFL draft in the first round. And of course, questions have been spiraling for weeks now about what exactly will the Cowboys do with them. What's the game plan? What are they targeting? Are they staying put, or are they trading? Are they going up, or are they going down? Well, recently we've been talking extensively about them potentially trading up for edge rusher David Bailey from Texas Tech. And while that is absolutely still definitely a huge possibility, according to Todd McShay and multiple different reports from legitimate insiders, it seems like there might also be a completely different kind of process and mindset that the Cowboys might have when it comes to an edge rushing selection in this draft. And this revelation comes from 105.3 The Fan, as they talked about an edge rusher that they have heard the Cowboys have legitimate interest in. And on top of it, they had a former Dallas Cowboys scout in the building alongside the hosts to talk about this and really just bring up what exactly it would mean for the Dallas Cowboys moving forward. Now, before we get too far into today's show and we start breaking down all the specifics and the details, I want to mention that this video is brought to you by Prize Picks, which is America's #1 sports picks app. It's seriously so good. It gives you the ability to get into the action in whatever way you want. We're going to dive into some Final Four selections later on in the show, because the tournament is heating up and there's some massive games happening tonight. But for right now, if you could do me a huge favor and go down in the description and click on the link to sign up with the code DIGEST, it really helps out the channel tremendously, and it means the world to me. I'm not exaggerating. Your support through that link directly impacts my ability to create more videos like this one, but we'll get you some actual picks that you can use for tonight's contest between Michigan and UConn in just a little bit. So stick around for that. Now, who was that scout? What exactly did he say that's got everybody talking? What did he reveal that's potentially changing the entire narrative around the Cowboys draft plans? Well, here is the report. Brian Bradis, who is a former Dallas Cowboys scout, tells Zach Wolchuk why the Dallas Cowboys might have a genuine interest in Texas A&M edge rusher Cassius Howe. Here is the official quote from today's radio show, and I want you to really listen to what he's saying, because this is the kind of inside information that you don't get very often. He said, quote, "If you look at what is going on with the defensive coordinator, Christian Parker, he has a relationship with Texas A&M head coach Mike Elko. When you look at how he fits as that stand-up edge rusher, and that's something the Cowboys are looking for, they are looking for a guy that can stand up on the edge and get after the quarterback." This is something that I do like, and I think this is being mentioned, is if we're going to talk edge rusher and we're going to talk that way, I think the better selection is a stand-up edge rusher, not a guy who's going to get down on all fours. Because ultimately, with the way the outside linebacker selection is going to work in Christian Parker's defense, you'd rather have somebody who's standing rather than down on all fours. Okay, so let's break down what that means, because this is actually huge information. So we're talking about the fact that Christian Parker, who is the new defensive coordinator for the Dallas Cowboys, he has a relationship with Mike Elko, who is the head coach at Texas A&M. That connection is real, and it matters. It matters because coaches talk to coaches. They know each other's systems. They know each other's preferences. And when you've got that kind of relationship, sometimes that influences draft decisions. Now, the key thing that Bradis is highlighting here is the distinction between what he calls a stand-up edge rusher versus someone who gets down on all fours. What does that mean exactly? Well, in football terminology, a stand-up edge rusher is someone who lines up and plays on the edge in more of an upright position. Think of it like an outside linebacker who's got pass rush responsibilities. They're standing tall, they're reading the offense, they're taking on blocks more with their hands and their positioning rather than getting low and driving forward off the snap. On the other hand, you've got edge rushers who are more traditional pass rushers, guys who get low, who get down on their hands and knees almost, who are lower to the ground and are driving forward to attack the offensive line. Now, that's not a huge difference between someone like Cassius Howe and David Bailey, but it is significant when you're talking about the scheme fit and what the defensive coordinator is actually looking for. The comparison that Broadus brings up is Max Crosby, the Las Vegas Raiders edge rusher, who the Cowboys heavily pursued in the trade market. Crosby is more of that lower get down edge rusher type. So Broadus is basically saying that Cassius Howe, who's more of a stand up type, might actually fit better with what Christian Parker is trying to do defensively than David Bailey might. Now, let's talk about Cassius Howe specifically, because this is someone who might be completely flying under the radar for a lot of casual Cowboys fans. Cassius Howe is an in-state guy, kind of like David Bailey is, and there are definitely some things that we can look at and like about him from a pure talent perspective. First of all, if you go to the stat page, there's some really, really fun statistics there. First and foremost, he had 11 and a half sacks this past season for the Texas A&M Aggies, which led the team. He was a big part of why they made it into the playoffs. Obviously, it didn't end well for Texas A&M over those final couple of games because they ran into the Longhorns and the Hurricanes, who just took them apart. But besides those two losses, he performed incredibly well throughout the season. Overall on the season, he had 31 tackles, 11 and a half sacks, 1 forced fumble, and 6 passes defended. The year before, in 2023, he had 7 passes defended with 4 sacks, 1 forced fumble as well. Then going back to his final year at Bowling Green State University, he had 9 and a half sacks, with 12 of those being assists and 1 pass defended. He was truly an edge rusher when he was at Bowling Green, a legitimate pass rush threat. So this guy's been a pass rusher his entire college career, 5 years in the college game. But when you look at him on tape, when scouts evaluate him, he looks like a day one kind of player. He looks ready to contribute immediately to an NFL defense. Now, obviously, there's a ton of discussion about David Bailey going on right now, and we've been covering that extensively. But here's the thing about Cassius Howe. That makes him incredibly attractive to the Cowboys. This is a guy that you wouldn't have to trade up to pick number 3 to acquire. You wouldn't have to mortgage your entire future just to get him. In fact, you might even be able to trade back, because if you look at ESPN's big board, they have Cassius Howe listed as the number 30 overall player in this draft class. Now, given the defensive capability of Cassius Howe and overall the way the draft is feeling and how players are being evaluated, I would tend to say that Cassius is probably going to go a little bit higher than 30. But at the same time, he also could very realistically fall into the second round. He kind of goes up and down the boards depending on who you're talking to and what evaluation you're looking at. His combine was definitely an interesting thing with some really good results and some that were just kind of okay. That being said, it does beg the question of whether pursuing Cassius Howe is worth it from a value perspective, because you can talk about David Bailey all day long. You can talk about the elite production he's got, the things that he possesses, and the characteristics he brings to the table. But he's going to come with a hefty price tag. You're going to have to trade up, and we've already established that trading up to number 3 is going to cost you multiple draft picks and future capital. So I'm going to ask the question right now. Would you like for the Cowboys to draft Cassius Howe? If you would, I want you to type Y for yes. If you would not, then I want you to type N for no down in the comments section. I genuinely want to see what you all think about the potential for the Cowboys to go out and get Cassius Howe as opposed to David Bailey, because that's the real decision here. That's the real choice. Now, if you ask me my personal opinion, I think the answer is yes. But the underlying statistics are things you definitely have to look at, and you have to be in the right mindset of why you want Cassius, because overall, his edge rushing grade is just fine. His overall PFF grade is 81.2, which is solid but not elite. But it's his pass rush grade that he really lives and dies on. He's got a 90.3 pass rush grade, which ranks him 27th out of over 700 edge rushers in this class. That's really good. That's the area where he excels. His run defense grade, on the other hand, is just okay. It's not terrible, but it's not elite either. And his coverage grade is just not good at all. Let's be real about that. He's not going to be covering tight ends or running backs effectively. But here's the thing. It's a guy who will come in here, produce, perform, and be able to really provide dividends to the Dallas Cowboys in so many different ways. He's going to rush the passer. He's going to get after the quarterback. He's going to create pressure. And that's what the Cowboys desperately need right now. And speaking of providing dividends, that's exactly what Prize Picks can do for you tonight, as they have some amazing Final Four picks available. I'm going more on a couple of different options because these are plays I'm genuinely confident in. First, I'm taking the more on Elliot Cadeau's assists at 7 right now. Then Terrace Reed, I'm going to take the more on his points at 9.5, meaning that one should be a little bit easier to grab. But I'm also going to take a harder one to grab with Trey McKenna and go more on his 11.5 points. These guys have genuinely been the stars of the Final Four. They've been the standout players throughout March Madness. And I'm putting in $20, and I'm projecting to win $90 back. So if you want to follow me with these picks tonight, if you want to try to win some prize picks money, I highly recommend you do. Go use the code DIGEST when you sign up. Now, in terms of David Bailey, obviously he's going to have a better overall PFF record. We already know that. He's the #1 ranked edge rusher according to PFF with a 93.3 grade, and that includes his elite pass rushing grade. But statistically speaking, the numbers between the two guys are not outlandishly different. Are Bailey's numbers better? For sure, absolutely. 14.5 sacks puts him 3 sacks ahead of Cassius Howe. But when you look at the passes defended, Bailey has 3 and Cassius Howe has 6. When you look at forced fumbles, Bailey has 3 and Cassius Howe has 1. Overall, they're relatively similar in production. The main difference is the body types. Cassius Howe is a little bit more of that stand-up, taller guy, right? Bailey is kind of hunched over, still standing, not putting his arms down. But he's more in that get-low position to attack the line of scrimmage. But overall, they have very similar characteristics in their play style to a certain extent. And here's the key thing. One of them you're going to have to trade up to, probably pick number 3, to acquire. The other one you could potentially even trade back or just straight up select them at pick number 20. You could get an edge rusher that you feel completely confident in without giving up a massive amount of draft capital. That changes everything about the Cowboys' approach. I think there are a lot of things to consider when breaking down both of these guys. Overall, though, the real focus needs to be on what the Dallas Cowboys actually have in mind for their edge rushers this season. Because we can talk about Cassius Howe, we can talk about David Bailey, but ultimately what we really need to be talking about is the defensive depth chart and how these guys fit into it. Because right now, Kenny Clark and Quentin Williams are your standout defensive tackles. Then you've got Otto Otuonu and Rashawn Gary as your one outside linebacker. If you get David Bailey, I think he becomes a true edge rushing type who plays on the line of scrimmage, probably more of a traditional end position. If you get Cassius Howe, I think he becomes an outside linebacker who plays alongside Otto Otuonu and Rashawn Gary in the scheme. So I think the better option might probably going to be David Bailey because you need more of an edge rusher on the line type of guy to replace what you lost when Micah Parsons went down. But Cassius Howe definitely provides some of those similar characteristics, just more from an outside linebacker perspective. Again, it's all about what Christian Parker wants to do with his defense and what his vision is for this unit. We can speculate all we want. We can say this, we can say that. But until we see what exactly this defense looks like on the field, we can't really tell you with 100% certainty what the Cowboys are going to do. And unfortunately for us as fans, we're not going to see it until after the NFL draft happens. So we're going to know pretty quickly what the Cowboys are actually going to do with their first 2 first-round picks. Hopefully, with the draft now being just closing in on 15 days away, we're going to be getting more reports about what the Cowboys' plans actually are, how they see the best fit for their first 2 picks, and of course, what other teams are looking at and planning to do. It seems like the Browns might be going after Carnell Tate, which is actually good because that's not a defensive player, and any team ahead of the Cowboys that does not pick a defensive player is going to be a good thing for Dallas, at least in the context of the defensive picks falling longer and potentially getting to them at a better draft position. Now, here's what I think is really important to note. It's the fact that it's a former Cowboy scout who said all these things about Cassius Howe. It's a guy who understands the thought processes inside the Cowboys war room and how they think about evaluating talent. Now, has Brian Bradis been a scout with Brian Schottenheimer or Christian Parker? No, he hasn't. But I think he understands the game plan from a coaching perspective, and especially when you're just looking from a player perspective and a needs perspective on your team, he probably can give you a really good insight into what the Cowboys might be thinking. But I do want to know what your thoughts are and kind of what you think the Cowboys will end up doing with their 2 first-round picks. Will they trade up? Will they stay put? Will they go for Bailey? Will they go for Howe? Drop your thoughts in the comment section below because that's where the real discussion happens, and I read every single comment. For now, though, we do absolutely appreciate you watching this video. Thanks so much for getting us to 16K. Let's go to 17K and beyond. And this is Jace Andrews on Cowboys Digest, and we'll catch you in the next one.